you know this mission is impossible. Tell them we were dead, but me and Anthony.
We're going to study tonight about what did Jesus do, has the opportunity to really affect and change how we view this thing called faith and this person named Jesus. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is we're going to start right now. So. Bro, you so lucky that, like, I'm who I am because you just chucked a grenade up here, dude. I feel like if I was anybody else, the police would be in here, an ambulance, like all kinds of stuff. Don't chuck grenades. That's rule number 3 of Awaken. Silence. I said, let's go, and I said nothing. I walked. I looked at you awkwardly. And for about 20 of those seconds, you were quiet too, before a grenade got thrown up here. It is a costume party, so it's the only night that that's acceptable. Outside of tonight, you're leaving, okay? And we're all probably also dead. Silence is what we're gonna talk about tonight. I was quiet, and it just noticed that pretty quickly it caught your attention, which is so interesting because I could get up here and say some funny stuff. Hi, baby girl. My baby's here. I could say something and get all into it or whatever, and a lot of times you guys would tune in pretty quick. Sometimes it might take longer than other, but what I find really interesting just now is that I was dead silent, and in a matter of about a second and a half, all of you were dead silent looking back at me. Confused, awkward, wondering what's going on. And tonight what we're gonna do is we're gonna talk about this idea of silence. And I think when we think of silence, we think of those things. We think of awkward, we think of painful. How many of y'all ever been left on red before? You know what I'm saying? You experience that silence, and it's a little bit awkward. I think that silence can be uncomfortable, really, really, really uncomfortable sometimes. And what we're going to talk about tonight is how Jesus, this guy that we're studying and trying to emulate, at times in his life was silent. And we're going to see what that meant. So I'm going to give you context. We're going to be in Matthew 27. If you've got your Bible or your cellular device-o and whatever you got that can access the Bible, which is pretty much anything nowadays, pull up Matthew 27, starting in verse 11. I'm going to give you context for this passage, though. This passage is Jesus in front of Pilate. A lot of us have heard this story. But I'm going to give you some context for this passage. What was going on before this passage is that Jesus had been betrayed. We're getting into the end of the gospel. We're getting towards the crucifixion. And Jesus had been betrayed by Judas. It talks about how Judas traded Jesus for something, I think it's 13 pieces of silver. It might be the wrong number, but not a lot is the point. He trades him for not a lot, betrays him. They have the Last Supper, this famous iconic image that we know where Jesus breaks bread and shares wine with his disciples, says that this is my body and this is my blood broken for you. And he talks to Judas and addresses him as the one who's betrayed him. And then we have Gethsemane, which Tyler talked about last week, where Jesus was so anxious and stressed out because he knew what was coming that he sweat blood, and Tyler broke that down last week and how Jesus relates to us in that way. And then we have, after that, how he gets arrested, and he goes to the Sanhedrin, which he goes before them, which are the leading priests. They're the religious people of these days. It's the pastors and the elders of today's church. He goes before them. Peter denies him 3 times, one of his closest friends who said, Lord, I'll never deny you, and he denies him 3 times. And then we also see right before this, Judas hangs himself, because Judas knows what he's done in betraying Christ. And that's what brings us to Matthew 27, verses 11 through 26. So start to get that picture. Start to get the kind of mood of what this is, the darkness of what's going on. And here we are in Matthew 27. I'm going to pull it up on the screens. Meanwhile, Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "You have said so," Jesus replied. When he was accused by the chief priests and the elders, he gave no answer. Then Pilate asked him, "Don't you hear the testimony they are bringing against you?" But Jesus made no reply, not even to a single charge, to the great amazement of the governor. Now it was the governor's custom at the festival to release a prisoner chosen by the crowd. At that time, they had a well-known prisoner whose name was Barabbas. It's not Jesus. I don't know where that came from. So when the crowd had gathered, Pilate asked them, "Which one do you want me to release to you, Jesus or Barabbas?" Jesus is in there again. Why is it doing this? Or Jesus, who was called the Messiah, Barabbas or Jesus? For he knew it was out of self-interest that they had handed Jesus over to him. While Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent him this message: "Don't have anything to do with that innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him." But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus executed. "Which of the two do you want me to release to you?" asked the governor. "Barabbas," they answered. "What shall I do then with Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" Pilate asked. They all answered, "Crucify him." "Why? What crime has he committed?" But they all shouted the louder, "Crucify him." When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but instead an uproar was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. "I am innocent of this man's blood," he said. "It is your responsibility." All the people answered, "His blood is on us and on our children." Then he released Barabbas to them, but he had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. The picture here is such a dark point in the gospel. We've yet to get what we know Jesus to do, to come back. And we painted all these things that he lived this 3 years of ministry, and his best friends betray him. His best friends deny him. He stands before the religious leaders who should be the ones who recognize who he is, and they're the ones who sent him to Pilate. And it's just so dark. He's with his friends at the Last Supper, and he has to say goodbye to them because he knows what's about to happen. And then we're here. He's in front of Pilate, the governor, the one who makes this decision about what was to happen to this Jesus that we study. But I want to focus on two passages in the book of Matthew and around this entire story that I think are insane if we really think about them. And here they are. Matthew 26, 62 through 63 says this. So this is like directly before when he's at the Sanhedrin, when he's before the religious people. Then the high priest stood up and said to Jesus, "Are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you?" Listen, but Jesus remained silent. The high priest said to him, "I charge you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God." And then just not even a full chapter later, at the end of this passage we just read, or even in the beginning, when he was accused by the chief priests and the elders, he gave no answers. Pilate said, "Don't you hear the testimony they're bringing against you?" But Jesus made no reply, not even to a single charge, to the amazement of the people. My take home is this. One of the most important things Jesus ever did was stay silent. What did Jesus do? We talk about these miracles. We talk about some of these powerful interactions he had, the ways he can change our lives, the ways he's relatable to us. We talk about Gethsemane and him sweating blood, and so many of you related to that message because you suffer with anxiety, and now we know that Jesus suffers with us in the exact same way, and he knows how hard it is to be you. But one of the most important things Jesus ever did was nothing. He stayed completely silent. And it changed the course of history. I think so often we think of silence so negative. We talked about how it's awkward, it's uncomfortable, it can be painful when you see that red message and you hear nothing afterwards. It's painful. But what we do, I think, with God is that when we feel that he's silent, we think that means he's either apathetic or absent. When we feel God isn't talking to us, when he's not communicating to us, when he's not moving in our lives in the ways that we think that he should, what we do is we say, "God, you're either apathetic, meaning you don't care, or you're not there at all, you're absent." And I think that we buy this lie, and these passages speak to us so loudly that one of the most powerful things Jesus ever did was stay silent. My little baby girl's in here. I think she might have left because she's a spitfire. But we're in a season where she starting to do things she shouldn't do, and she thinks it's funny. So I started to put her in timeout. Listen, I'm not a dad to play with. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, I'll throw that grenade back at you, sucker. So this little girl has this new thing where she'll do something, and I'll say, Evelyn, don't do that, or whatever. She likes to throw her food off her plate and on the floor. I'll be, Evelyn, if you throw your food again, you're going into timeout. She'll look me in the eye. She'll put her hand in her plate. She'll grasp it, and while maintaining eye contact, she will go. And listen, it is adorable, but your boy got to do what a daddy's got to do. So I say, baby girl, we're going to timeout. So I take a little chair, I put it in the corner, and I sit her in it. And I say, listen, Evelyn, you're in timeout because you threw food when daddy said not to throw food, and I turn away, okay? And then I stand there because I'm tough. And after, no, you're right, I'm not. After about 15 seconds, because she's one, she starts to go, Daddy. And I don't say anything because she's in timeout. And then she'll start to say, done, Daddy. And I'm like, baby, you're not done, you're in timeout, and I turn back away. So maybe for the next minute or two, she does this, and she says, Daddy, and I don't say anything. But here's the reality of that situation is that I'm putting her there and being silent to her responses because I want to teach her and help her to grow. Without that, she's going to grow up thinking certain things are okay that aren't. She's going to grow up thinking doing certain things are okay that are not. And I feel like so often what we do with God is when we feel as if he's being silent, rather than taking it as a growth opportunity or a learning opportunity or a chance to trust him, we say you're either apathetic or absent. And that's what people do, and then they walk away because they have this incorrect mindset. So we're going to study right now what Jesus actually did. This isn't me just saying, like, here's what I think God does about these things. It's in the good book, you know what I'm saying? Someone turn to your neighbor and say, good book. So good. Here we go. One thing I want to be really clear, and I want you to hear this before we get into these 3 points and we talk about what Jesus' silence and what God's silence in our life can tend to mean. I want to be really clear about two things. The first thing is this, is that often your lack of hearing is because you do not listen. It has nothing to do with the fact that God's not talking to you, that God's not moving, that God's not doing certain things, and it has everything to do with that we aren't taking time to listen. And you can never hear anything when you take no time to listen. So what I want to say that, and this is why I want to say that, because what we'll do is you'll leave this and you'll say, well, you know what? I think I'm in a season of silence and I need to do one of these things, and you'll get frustrated because that season of silence isn't going to end. But the absolute truth of the matter is you've taken no time to listen. We have to be listeners if we ever want to hear. So that's important to know. Because God is not being silent if you never listen. God is not being silent if your Bible is closed. God is not being silent if you never pray. God is not being silent if you don't have a lot of good Christian friends. That's you not listening. There's a big difference. But the second thing is we're going to talk about the times when God is intentionally quiet. The times when God is strategically being silent in your life, similarly to how Jesus was right here. So check out verse 26. In fact, I'll go back to it so you can read it, okay? Because I'm a good friend. The very last verse. Then he released Barabbas to them. After all this had happened, after he was silent, and he didn't stand up against these claims that had been falsely put against him. Just think about the gravity of that he chose to be silent knowing he was innocent. Then he released Barabbas to them and had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. My first point is this. Jesus was silent so that you could go free. Jesus was silent so that you could go free. Here's what we need to know about Barabbas in this. There's a little historicity that we can get to with who he was. Barabbas was known to be a murderer. He was known to be the leader of an insurrection. He was kind of one of like the lowest of the lows, had been in prison, was on death row type of thing. And he happens to be the one that's brought up against Jesus, who is completely innocent. Pilate even knows it. Pilate chooses to wash his hands afterwards because he says, I will not have the blood of this innocent man on me. They knew he was innocent, and they seemed to just put the worst possible man up against him. And it says that because of Jesus' silence, Barabbas was released. And what I think we need to understand today, that you and I are Barabbas. And you're gonna say, Phil, I've never murdered anybody. I'm not the leader of an insurrection. I'm not the lowest of the low. But here's the absolute truth. We talk about this all the time. One single offense against God is equal to them all. If you've told that little lie, if you've shown anger in a way that you shouldn't have done, if you've lashed out or used language that maybe you shouldn't have, maybe you've looked and touched those things you shouldn't have, we are no different than Barabbas. We are standing right up there against Jesus, the perfect sacrifice. And he has every reason in the world to defend himself and say, guess what, God? I didn't do it. I haven't done anything. I've come here and I've lived perfectly. I've suffered. I've helped people. I've healed people. I've taught people about you. Look at what they did. They've done all these things. Every day they turn against you. He could say all of that, and he chose to stay silent. He was silent so that you could go free. I think another thing we need to think about is that we're also the crowd. It says in this passage that the crowd chanted, we want Barabbas. And they asked, well, what should we do to this man Jesus who's called the Messiah? They're acknowledging that he came and did the things he did, and they call him Messiah. They're acknowledging that. Well, what do you want with him? And they yell, crucify him. And I think what we need to see, my brothers and sisters, is that every time we choose to willingly sin, knowing what God did for us, we say, crucify him. We say, I don't care what he did. I don't care that he's perfect. Let me go free. Because I want to live how I want. I want to do what I want. I don't care that a perfect man's sitting next to me who claims to be God. I'm going to do what I want. And so often we take the place of the crowd the way we live. We say, crucify him. And the beautiful thing is that Jesus chooses not to defend himself. In fact, Jesus chooses to let that person, the you, the me, the Barabbas, chooses to let them go by saying nothing. Can you imagine? How many of you have been accused of something you didn't do? How many of you avidly wanted to defend yourself? You were angry. I didn't do it. I can't believe you'd say this about me. He did it. She did it. Jesus had more reason to do that than any of us ever. And he stayed completely silent. Jesus was silent so that you can go free. And here's the thing. Not only was Barabbas freed from the penalty of what he had done, the chains were dropped off him. He had the opportunity to live freely now. So not only was he let go from his death sentence, but he was told, hey, chains are off, go live. Jesus' silence frees us, and that is for you. The second thing I want us to think through is this, that Jesus was silent so that you could grow in trust. Jesus was silent so that you can grow in trust. Here's the absolute reality of our culture, which is I want what I want now. I want it to be big and awesome. I want it to show up on my Instagram or TikTok feed, okay? You know what I'm saying? Not Facebook, because that's for old people. You know what I'm saying? We want it to show up. We want that big signal. We want that big move. We want that big call. We want God to show up in the crazy way. Hey, like I prayed for this. I want you to come down with a bolt of lightning and show me that you're doing what you're doing. But what I think happens when we buy into that culture of who God is, hey, well, if your God's real, how come he didn't save that person? How come this didn't magically disappear, or you aren't blessed beyond measure? When we want this instant gratification type of Jesus, this give it to me when I want it, how I want it type of thing, if we got that all the time, we would not need to trust him. If every time we prayed for something, you prayed for $1 million and it just appeared in your hands, why would you need to trust God for anything? He shows up every single time in these big immaculate ways, gets you whatever you want, however you want. There's no room for a growth in trust. I think about me and my wife and our relationship, and the things that have grown us in trust the most is never, ever when like she comes home with, a sweet gift, or like an Amazon package shows up and it says, hey baby, and it's like a shirt that I really like. That doesn't help me grow in trust. I mean, I love her. I'm like, thank you. That's super dope. Why'd you do that, man? Cool. You know the times that helps me grow in trust, that helps us grow in trust? It's the times when we're separated and I completely can believe and trust in her that she's not gonna do something she shouldn't be doing. Or that I'm not gonna go off and do this or that she's just not gonna one day get up and leave. You know what I'm saying? It's not these big moments, it's the little things. Sometimes it's the unsaid stuff that helps to grow you in trust. And I think what we do so often is we buy this idea that we walk by sight and not faith, and then we never grow in trust. 2 Corinthians 5:7 says the dead opposite. In fact, it says that we walk by but not by sight. We walk by faith and not by sight. Can I tell you what this passage implies? This passage implies that a faith that is only by what you see is not faith at all. A faith that is only by what you see is not a faith at all. Jesus modeled this so beautifully for us. We know via what Tyler taught us last week that he went to Gethsemane, this garden, right? And what did he ask God? His Father. He said, take this cup. Take this cup from me. Like, I don't want it. I don't want what's about to happen. Like, I am your son. I have done everything perfectly. I have lived here without ever doing anything wrong. I've always done what you said. Please take this cup from me. Tell me what God says in this passage. Nothing. It doesn't tell us that God answered. At the very most, we know that Jesus was told no. But the passage doesn't tell us that God spoke back to him or interacted him with anyway. But Jesus, in the way he always does it, modeled it for us. Because what did Jesus hearing silence in this moment do to him? Did it make him not believe? Did Jesus Christ walk away from the Christian faith? It would just be chin after that. Like, there's no Christ, so it's just chin. We're the chin faith. Christian. No. He heard nothing from his Father in a plea that you would think if ever a prayer was answered, it'd be this one. But Jesus chose to trust amidst silence because he knew that God's plan was bigger or better than anything he could possibly fathom in his half human, half God, fully both brain. And here's the thing, our interactions are no different. I think that the best thing you can do for somebody sometimes to grow in trust and relationship with them is shut up. It's just shut up. We love to answer problems and solve problems and point things out. And we love to do all these different things. Well, I'm gonna help you. I'm gonna argue with you. I'm gonna defend myself. Whatever you're saying, I got a response. I'm just gonna listen to respond. And sometimes the best thing you could do for a relationship to grow in trust is shut up. Just to shut up. So beautiful. I've been learning this. Sometimes silence says, I hear you. Sometimes silence says, I'm not gonna argue with you. I'm not gonna defend myself to you. I'm not gonna fix your problems because only you can do that. But I'm just gonna be silent and listen. And I think a lot of us can attest when someone just listens to us well, there's this new thing we have for them. There's this new trust we have for them. Well, man, you really heard my problems. You didn't try to fix them for me. You didn't give me crappy advice that I didn't ask for. You were just silent. And because of that, I trust you. God works in the same way with us. We can give him our cares. And know if we don't hear this audible voice back, he promises us in this book he's listening and that he wants what's best for us. And he's working all things for good according to those who love him and are called according to his purposes. Sometimes his silence is just hearing you and teaching you to trust. Jesus was silent so you could grow in trust. And the last one is this. Jesus was silent for your salvation. I think when God kind of like hit me with this idea that minus his silence, there was no salvation. Think about it. If Jesus, who had every right to defend himself, every right to argue, every right to say, I did not do this, I'm even asking God to take this. Like I think in my life, the times that I want God to take something from me or I want him to do something for me, if you were to ever instruct me to not only do the opposite, but you have to do it with the burden you're currently carrying, meaning he says, Jesus, I know that you don't want to do this in your sweat and blood, but not only do you have to do it, it's like gonna happen tomorrow. Those are the times I rebel the most. Because I don't want to. It's not what I want to do. I'm stressing out about it. I don't like it. And Jesus modeled this so beautifully for us. And had he defended himself, what happens? Pilate says, okay, you're free to go. You're an innocent man. You've done nothing wrong. We're keeping Barabbas. We're keeping you. We're keeping me because Jesus did nothing to deserve this punishment. And if he doesn't get punished and if he doesn't get sent to that cross, he's never crucified. If he's never crucified, he's never buried. If he's never buried, he never raises. If he never raises, we have no gospel. We have no hope. We have nothing to hold to that this life is about something bigger than just coming here, living and dying. But his silence was the key moment in our salvation. His silence was him saying, okay, Father, I submit to what you have for me. I don't like it, and I want to argue, and I want to defend myself, and I want to be right here, and I want you to take this from me, but I'm going to set this down, and I'm just going to shut up and trust you. Jesus was silent for our salvation. The most important thing done in the history of eternity came through complete silence. And here's an idea that I think we need to embrace, that sometimes Jesus is screaming at us through silence. Sometimes that we feel like we're not hearing him. Sometimes we feel as if nothing's going on, there's nothing stirring in the spiritual pot. Those are the times we're like, come on, I already did it. I already did this for you. I was silent at that podium and they crucified me because of it. What else do I need to say? I already said everything I had to say, and all you have to do is just trust me and believe it. And I think we let silence just trick us. That's a good word, like just trick us into thinking he's not present when he's like, I've been here the entire time and I already did everything for you. His silence led to our salvation. And sometimes I really think it's a good reminder that he already did it for us. He already made his statement. He already said it is finished. In fact, he screamed it, that it is finished, that you're worth it, that I love you, I'll die for you. And he did it all through choosing to stay silent when he could have defended himself. Silence speaks powerful words sometimes. He was silent so that you could go free. Because you're Barabbas, I'm Barabbas. And we need to understand that. He was silent so that you could grow in trust. In the same way, I don't just leave my daughter behind me, but I know I have to do that so that she can learn, so that she can grow. It makes her uncomfortable so she knows not to do the things that she shouldn't do. Jesus was silent, and sometimes chooses to be silent so that we can grow in trust. And then the biggest thing is that he was silent so that you can receive salvation. He was silent for your salvation. Silence is not a bad thing, my friends, by any means. In fact, one of the most important things that Jesus ever did was stay silent. So this week, we're gonna watch a video here in a second that's really powerful and it talks about this. But this week, I wanna challenge you to spend time with God and I want you to listen. We can never claim that God's silent in our life. Don't ever go to your D group leader and say, well, I'm just not experiencing God, if you did not take any time to listen to him that week. Don't do that to them. Take time this week, listen to God. Listen for what he might be saying to you. Listen to what he might be trying to teach to you. That might mean shutting your Xbox off, turning your phone off for a few minutes. Just give him 5 minutes. 5 minutes a day where you just sit, pray, and listen. How many of us I need y'all to be super real with me. How many of us do that? Just once a day. How many of us do that? Okay, that's what I expected. That's not a Debbie Downer because I don't do it every day, okay? Listen, we in the same boat, family. But if we don't listen, we'll never hear. And here's the last thing I want you to do this week. I want you to thank God for the silence that he used to save you. And I want you to learn from the times that he might be speaking the loudest through saying nothing. And then lastly, I want you to just realize what he did for you in that moment by saying nothing. Pray with me.